What a mighty God we serve. And at the end of this message, we will partake in the Lord's Supper as an active expression of our appreciation for this God who has done so much for us. This term, Deuteronomy, literally means second law. It is not that God is giving his Old Testament saints a new law. He is simply repeating the law that he had already given to their parents. Some 40 years earlier, when you read Numbers chapter 12, 13, and 14, you will discover that God created an opportunity for his people to enter into what he described as the land of promise. Because of their fear, disbelief, and obedience, they were not able to enter into that land. It took them 40 days to spy out the land. And after 40 days, they came back and made a public and uniform decision to walk in disobedience to the word and will of the Lord. They were being led by a servant named Moses. And God said to Moses, "Excuse me, Momo, how many days did it take them to spy out the land and make up their minds that they weren't going to be obedient to me?" And Moses said, "Lord, it took them 40 days. Lord, on top of that, the only folks that were really with you were me, my two siblings, Aaron and Miriam, and then a fellow named Joshua and a fellow named Caleb were the only ones who were really with you. The rest of them murmured and complained and said that when we looked at the inhabitants of the land, we saw them as giants and saw ourselves as grasshoppers." And God said, that's what you get when you look in the wrong mirror. When you're looking in the wrong mirror, all you see is you. When you look in the right mirror, you see that God is standing with you. His grace and his mercy are always beside you. God's conclusion was, since it took you 40 days to make up your mind, I'm going to give you a year for every day. They had 600 men at that time who were above the age of 20, which was considered fighting age. And over the next 40 years, God killed off all 600,000 of those men. By this time, their children, their grandchildren, their wives have now progressed in age, and God is now going to give them the opportunity to do right what their ancestors had done wrong. And one of the things I love about God, while generations may change, God's rules for generations do not change. Well, Pastor, we don't have, it's 2019, Pastor, it's 21st century. We don't have to say things like ma'am and sir anymore till you get in court. You learn a whole lot of ma'am and sir when you in court. Till you get to the title office getting ready to sign the paperwork on their mortgage, and they tell you that there's a discrepancy in your credit report. It's excuse me, ma'am, then. This excuse me, sir, then. While generations change, God's instructions to generations does not change. And within the limited framework of this single chapter, Deuteronomy chapter 8, it is proven to us what a mighty God we serve. I want to give you several reasons that I am convinced and convicted that our God is a mighty God. The first reason that I'm convinced that God is a mighty God is because he tells us exactly what he wants us to do. That makes him a mighty God. Kids, don't you wish your parents would tell you exactly what they want you to do? Because some of us as kids won't do right with the little bit we caught. Parents, don't you wish your kids would tell you exactly what they want you to do? Because sometimes you look at them and you say, what's wrong with you? What can I do to help you? And sometimes they want to beat around the bush, when the truth is you really wish they would tell you exactly what they want you to do. Wives, don't you wish your husband would tell you exactly what he wants you to do? Husbands, why y'all laugh? Husbands, don't you wish your wives would tell you exactly what they want you to do? So that y'all not riding home from Burger King and it's obvious she mad about something. And you say to her, baby, what's wrong? You figure that. Wouldn't it be nice if they just told you exactly what they wanted you to do? God is a mighty God because he tells us exactly what he wants us to do. Look at that first statement in verse 1. All the commandments that I am commanding you today, you shall be careful to do that. That means you ought to be full of care, full of concern when it comes to doing what the Lord wants you to do. He really spends the bulk of Deuteronomy chapter 8 telling them specifically what he wants them to do. And I believe that our God is a mighty God because he doesn't leave this life up to us to figure out. He tells us exactly what he wants us to do. It's right here in his word. And the reason some of us are living defeated lives is because you're reading other people's books, but you won't read his. If I play a Beyonce record in here, you know every word. But if I ask you to turn to Matthew, it'd be 30 minutes later, and you still trying to find out whether or not Matthew is in the Bible. If you're going to do his word, you got to know his word. And all you have to do to know it is to just read it. And the easiest thing the devil can do to keep you defeated is to allow you to own a book of promises and you don't read the promise book that you have. I want to know what he wants me to have. I do. He tells us exactly what he wants us to have. Well, that's not the only reason that our God is a mighty God. The second reason that he's a mighty God, watch this, is because he promises us exactly what he wants us to have. He promises us exactly what he wants us to have. I love this because what he means by this is if you do what I tell you, you can have what I promised. Have mercy, Lord. And one thing about us as human parents, sometimes we make promises with the best of intentions. You're just not able to always fulfill those promises. I also want to recommend to parents, don't go around making promises you know you can't keep. They won't let you have a dog in your apartment and you done promised this child a pony. It's just not, it's not going to work. What you getting for your birthday? Mama say a giraffe, but they won't let us have cats, and I don't know how we're going to get a giraffe. Verse 1. All the commandments I am commanding to you today, you shall live, or you shall be careful to do. Watch this. Hear the promises. That you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to give to your fathers. That means God has some promises. What's his first promise? It's in verse 1. He wants you to live abundantly. He not only came to give us life, he came to give us life more abundantly. And somebody in this room, you are guilty of wasting too much time. You're not living an abundant life. You are living a life that lacks or is absent of abundance. Every morning you wake up, you ought to wake up with a new sense of purpose and a new sense of drive. What are you getting at, Thorpe? The Lord can't use lazy people. There's a word my mom used to use during my childhood. You can't spell it, but I knew what it meant. It was oomph. Oomph. You can't spell it, but I know what she meant. As a child, we would be in the dressing room at JCPenney or Sears trying on school clothes, and we would put the clothes on, and she'd say, stand up straight with your shoulders back and your chin up. And then she'd say, have some oomph about yourself. I still don't know how to spell it, but I sure know what she meant. And from that day forward, I've been trying to walk into rooms with some oomph in myself. He wants us to live abundantly. That's not all. He wants us to multiply constantly. Constantly. It's right there in the text in verse 8. He says that you may live and multiply. He wanted as many of them as possible who would walk in obedience to his word. Jerry Clower is one of the great entertainers of yesteryear. I love listening to him. And he grew up in a home that did not have a dad, but he had an uncle named Versi Ledbetter. What was interesting about Jerry's uncle, Uncle Versi and his wife, had 11 children. And whenever they would go to the county fair, they would stop by Jerry's house. Jerry's mother was Versi's sister. And he would check in on them. And if he thought he could afford it, he would take Jerry and his brother along with his 11 children, and he and his wife would take them all to the county fair. And they would go to some of the attractions, and the attraction would cost a nickel apiece. And in those days, Versi Ledbetter didn't have that kind of money to pay for 15 people, 13 children and 2 adults. He couldn't afford to pay for all of them. Then they found an attraction that said the world's largest bull. And Jerry said he really wanted to see that bull. So they walk up to where the display is located, and the fellow said, come right up, see the world's largest bull, 15 cents a piece. And he said, well, we couldn't afford 5. I know we can't afford 15. Just then, the owner of the bull looked out and saw Versi Ledbetter with 13 children and said, tell that man to come up here and see the bull. The attendant said, you mean you're going to allow them to see the bull for free? He said, the problem is I don't want them to see the bull. I want the bull to see them. Some of y'all don't know nothing about bulls. Because what he wanted to use that bull to do was to multiply, to make some more bulls. And he said, any brother that's got 13 head of youngins, I need the bull to see him. He wants us to live abundantly. He wants us to multiply constantly. But then he wants us to conquer endlessly. Watch what he says by the time you get to the end of verse 1. He says, multiply, here's the conquering, and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to give to your forefathers. He said, I want you to go in and conquer. We are not only to be conquerors, we are to be more than conquerors. And God is so good until he promises us that if we do what he tells us, he promises us that we will live abundantly, we will multiply constantly, and we will conquer endlessly. Well, not only does he promise us exactly what he wants us to have, but he leaves us without any excuses. He leaves us without any excuses. Mama, I went to school today and I couldn't focus. With all that breakfast you ate? You slept last night in your own bed, not under the stars. You wearing your own shoes, your own clothes. You got life, health, dental, vision, insurance. The least you can do is stay focused in class. Amen. Let me flip it. You get a check, a parking spot, lunch. The least you can do is work on those people's jobs for the hours they pay you to be there without talking for 3 hours on the phone, another 4 hours on social media. You at work sending people friend requests. He leaves us without any excuses. One of the things I love, it's very historic. Some of you may have it on your wall in your home. If you do have it on your wall in your home, when I mention it, you can raise your hand. Some of us might be ashamed because it's a little, it shows how long we've been around. But there is a very distinctive photograph. It is a picture of an image of Jesus, and he is walking along a beach holding a man in his hands. And what makes that so interesting is that prior to the image of Jesus, you see that behind the man there were 2 sets of footprints in the sand. But when Jesus picked the man up, there was only 1 set of footprints in the sand. And some of us in here know what it's like. I don't know who I'm talking to. Somebody in this room knows what it's like when you thought you were going to lose your mind, only to discover that when you couldn't carry yourself, the Lord was carrying you. And you look back over your shoulder and all you can think about is, had it not been for the Lord, I would never have made it through that negative set of circumstances. One of my most favorite songs in the world was written by a young man named Todd Dulaney. And in the song, the title of the song is Pulling Me Through. And in the opening line of the song, he says, through all I have gone through, Lord, it was you. Lord, it was you. Through all I have gone through, Lord, it was you. Lord, it was you pulling me through. And then he gets to a line in the song that just messes me up every time. He says, when I stumbled, when I cried, when it felt like I wanted to die. And then he hits a line that just makes me quiver all over. When my friends turned and they walked away, you were right here to stay. Lord, it was you pulling me through. That means, ladies and gentlemen, we are without excuse because the Lord has been taking good care of you. And then Todd Delaney gets to the end of the song, and then he makes this declaration. He'll never walk out on you. No, never. No, never. He'll never walk out on you. No, never. No, never. Then he gets to another part of the song that really messes me up, and he says, I'm a witness that he'll never walk out on you. No, never. No, never. God proves to his people in verse 2 through verse 18 that if no one else needed to trust him, they needed to trust him. Watch what you find beginning in verse 2. He says, you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He humbled you and let you be hungry and fed you with manna. That was a supernatural bread that rained down from heaven, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. That means instead of getting mad when you run out, ask yourself, what is God trying to teach you? Because some things you have asked God for, he refuses to give to you, because if he gave it to you, you would give it credit instead of him credit. Look at what he did for them in verse 4. Your clothing. Now they've been walking 40 years. Your clothing did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Thus you are to know that in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you just as a man disciplines his son. Therefore you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains, of springs, flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates. A pomegranate literally means a many-seeded apple. I don't know if you've seen one before. They're packed full of seeds. A land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat food without scarcity. Somebody say, that's me right there. That's where I need to be. An endless Popeye's chicken buffet is right where I need to be, in which you will not lack anything. A land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I have commanded you this day. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied and have built good houses and lived in, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold multiply, and all that you have multiplies, he says, be careful when I start to bless you. Verse 14, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, out from the house of slavery. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness, with its fiery serpents and scorpions, and thirsty ground, where there was no water. He brought water for you out of the rock of flint. In the wilderness he fed you with manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you, and that he might test you to do good for you in the end. Otherwise, you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. I can't stand kids who get old enough to start smelling themselves and act like you've been here all along. When the truth is, if your mama or daddy would have taped your mouth shut at birth, you wouldn't be where you are today. We got some nerve to think you grown in somebody else's house. I'm going to my room. No, you ain't. You going to the room I let you stay in. Your name ain't nowhere on this mortgage. I own all these rooms. All of them. That's my backpack. No, it ain't. That's my backpack. Well, my grandmama bought it, but it stays in my house. That make it mine. Everything under this roof is mine. My daddy had a rule. Anything that went in the refrigerator belonged to everybody in the whole house. So if you wanted to drink all that soda, drink it all one time. Because just as sure as you put it in there, it became community property. He says in verse 18, but you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you the power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers as it is this day. We have, ladies and gentlemen, absolutely no excuses. He leaves us without any excuses. But that's not all he does to prove that he's a mighty God. There's one last one. It is this. He warns us of the consequences of our disobedience. He's a mighty God. He takes care of us. Why? He tells us exactly what he wants us to do. He promises us exactly what he wants us to have. He leaves us without any excuses. But then his love for us is so complete until he warns us of the consequences of our disobedience. He does it in verse 19 through verse 20. Now in 1 through 18, he says, I sure been taking care of you. And there's more that I want to do for you. He said, I've taken care of you for the last 40 years. I fed you when you were hungry. He said, I even let you get hungry so you would let me feed you. I gave you water when you got thirsty, but I let you get thirsty first so that you would rely on me as the source of your supply. He said, I'm going to give you gold. I'm going to give you silver. I'm going to give you houses you didn't build. You will drink from wells you didn't dig. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to take care of you. He said, now when you get where you're going, don't let your head get big and start trying to take credit for what I did. He said, I'm going to look out for you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to take care of you. But don't play with me. Beginning in verse 19, he tells them, it shall come about if you ever. That's the kind of people I had who would say to you after they were good to you, if you ever. If you have a dream that you disrespected them, wake up and apologize. It shall come about if you ever forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them. Again, he told them in 1 through 18, ain't nobody took care of you like I have taken care of you. Now let you wander in the wilderness for 40 years, but your clothes didn't wear out. You wandered for 40 years, your feet didn't swell. You didn't have to stop by the Jerusalem Walmart and go to the shoe section and get you some new sandals. I've been taking care of you. He said, but it shall come about if you ever forget the Lord your God, go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that you will surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so you shall perish, because you would not listen to the voice of the Lord your God. He is a mighty God, but he is not a God to be played with. So before you decide that you want to be blessed, also decide that you want to be obedient. Because sometimes you can go up fast, but always remember, the higher you get, the further you have to fall. Keep your eyes on the Lord. And in and through your life, he will continue to be a mighty God.